Hi, it's Pastor Wagner again. Welcome to my video blog. Last week we looked at the doctrine of total depravity, and this week I'd like to continue on through the tulip, as it's been called. For those of you who are not familiar with that, that was something that one of the Protestant reformers, John Calvin, came up with back in the 1500s to explain the doctrine of grace. It stands for total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, and preservation of the saints. Now, as you'll see here in a couple weeks, I would take issue with how irresistible grace is explained by mainstream Calvinism, and I would also change perseverance of the saints to preservation of the saints, that God preserves his saints. But anyway, I'll get into that in a couple weeks. But I'd like to look at unconditional election today and see what the Bible has to say about that. And I am going to try to keep this to 5 minutes, as I said in the first video blog. So the best way to cut to the chase is to go right to Romans chapter 9. That is the election chapter in the Bible for anybody familiar with it. So if we go to Romans chapter 9, Paul introduces that chapter by talking about how it appears that Israel had been cast off, and as he goes on to show that there is an Israel within an Israel, he says in verse 6, "Not as though the word of God hath taken none effect, for they are not all Israel which are of Israel." So he goes on in this chapter to show that not everybody that is a descendant of Abraham is a child of God. And he uses Isaac and Ishmael as the first example, the two boys of Abraham, how Isaac was a child of God, Ishmael was not. But then he ups the ante and he takes it to Jacob and Esau, who were the children of Isaac, and they were both twin brothers, and one of them was a child of God and one of them wasn't. So let's read it in Romans chapter 9 and verse 11. We'll start in verse 10, and it says, "And not only this, but when Rebekah," that was Isaac's wife, "also had conceived by one, even by our father Isaac, for the children being not yet born, neither having done any good or evil, that the purpose of God according to election might stand, not of works, but of him that calleth, it was said unto her, the elder shall serve the younger, as it is written, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated." So there is the most clear, succinct verse or verses in the Bible of God's unconditional election. Here are two boys yet in the womb, Jacob and Esau. It says right there, they have neither having done any good or evil that the purpose of God according to election might stand. So God's purpose in electing, in choosing one of those boys and not the other, in choosing Jacob and not choosing Esau, had nothing to do with anything they did. They were still in the womb, neither having done any good or evil. So, I mean, that is unconditional election. There could be no clearer statement of unconditional election than when two babies are in the womb, haven't even been born, haven't done any good or evil, and this is how God's election was determined. Unconditionally, had nothing to do with what these boys did. It was completely unconditional. It was not based on their works. Not based on their works whatsoever. He said, according to election might stand, not of works, but of him that calleth. It was not conditioned upon any of their works. What they did, what they believed, anything they did, because they're still in the womb. They couldn't do anything. Unconditional, you see. So that, just to cut to the chase, there are other verses we could use, but that one is as plain as it needs to be. God unconditionally elects or chooses some sinners to save just because he wants to. It's because his prerogative. So next time we'll take a look at limited atonement. Thanks for tuning in again, and I'll see you next week.